So firstly, I'm going to apologize. I learnt French at school some 50 years ago. It was really good then. And every time I come to France and I meet Francois and Jean-Pierre, I realize just how bad it is. So I apologize in advance that I'm having to, especially these days, speak in English. And it's, you know, England's not exactly, or Britain's not exactly favor of the month over here. But I'm not here as a Brit. I'm here as a firm European. I'm half Italian. And the Italian genes, as hopefully you will see, will flow. The title is different from what you've got in the program, because I think what we're trying to do in the Alliance is to build bridges to deliver predictive medicine. There's been a lot of talk now. We need to do some action. And I think, as you've heard from Madame de Grostet, I understood the French, largely a lot of the challenges that we have faced in medicines. This is going to be focused on medicines, but actually this is relevant beyond medicine. This is also devices and software and potentially cosmetics as well, and potentially also insurance companies, but because they're increasingly getting involved in healthcare. We have a status quo which is unsustainable because of the aging population, the complexity of disease, the limited treatments that are available, the pressures on healthcare budgets, unmet need in pediatric indications, and also in rare diseases. And we don't know quite what to do about it. And I think one of the things that we need to remember, as was taught to us by Leonardo da Vinci back in the 15th century, is actually the body's a machine. And it's about time we started to think about it as a machine. And we started to look at it as engineers look at machines. Because function emerges from the dynamic interactions that underpin that machine, both in the normal state and at times of dysfunction. And if you're trying to bring back dysfunction to a state of normality, logic dictates then that you need to work with the machine and its dynamics. And to do that, we need computer modeling. Now, that is not new. This has been going on for years. As Francois said in his introduction, I kicked off one of the first industry systems biology groups back in 2000. And since then, there's been an awful lot of anecdotal work that's been going on. This was a PricewaterhouseCoopers report in 2008 that basically is telling the industry, pharmaceutical industry now, it's time you guys started to virtualize. It's time you guys started to look at modeling and simulation as part of your business model and as a core component of where you need to go. And it called on specifically greater collaboration between industry, academia, the regulators, governments, and healthcare. And that's relevant to what I'm going to talk to you about a bit later on. So if that's all there, and we've got evidence that this works, and there's stuff going on, and there are anecdotal examples in devices and also in pharma that it works, why do we need to build bridges? Well, despite that, uptake's been relatively slow and relatively tentative. There is some added in decision making. I won't say that it's absent. There is decision making, use of modeling simulation in the industry, definitely. But there's a lack of confidence in silico as a model platform compared with classical in vitro or in vivo. And I think that's a lot to do with a lack of understanding or an unfamiliar uncertainty in the models compared with the familiar uncertainty that has grown with in vitro and in vivo. And this encompasses regulatory hurdles as well. Now, along with the suggestion that actually it's not happening, it is happening in pockets, I don't want to diss, as we say in English, the regulators. There is work going on in the regulatory area. There are working groups. This is three screenshots from the European Medicines Agency that's been working with the European Federation of Pharmaceutical Industry Associations using to create a modeling and simulation working group, which is exploring how to implement this more broadly beyond the standard pharmacokinetics, pharmacodynamics, and physiology-based pharmacodynamics into a more modeling the systems, the physiology that underpins the disease. And this is just a working group. It's actually mirrored also by what's been going on in the States. They also have a modeling and simulation working group, but the States, that the FDA have an agency-wide strategy to adopt modeling and simulation. And they're talking about digital patients, and they're talking about virtual clinical trials. They're looking at how modeling and simulation can help to streamline these things. And they're talking about it in the context of personalized medicine. A little aside, if you ask me personally, I don't believe that personalized medicine ambitions can be delivered in the absence of a modeling and simulation platform. You can't understand the complexities, even of cancer, which is a highly gene-driven, typically gene-driven disease. But what about diabetes and the rest? There's so much going on. You need to be able to simulate those things if we're going to go anywhere at all. This is a slide taken from Ina Scott-Heim-Rooston, the chair of the European Medicines Agency's Modelling and Simulation Working Group, that's basically saying we're encouraging quantitative modelling. We're all on a learning curve. We need to be working together to understand what it can do and, more importantly, what it can't do, and how we then use that in terms of the scientific rigor and confidence that you need for the regulatory process. And this is a call to actually work together to make this happen. These are some of the challenges and opportunities that have come up in the discussions with our pharma colleagues, and you can read them there on the slide. But basically, despite these working groups, nothing's been adopted yet. There is nothing in regulation. There's nothing there that's saying this is part of your dossier submission. And this is, I guess, where we're coming in with the Alliance, because there's a call now for a global approach to define good practices on acceptance of modeling and simulation in the regulatory approval process. Not just working groups now, but trying to get policy delivered to actually help the regulators say this is something that we need and help them to embrace these new technologies constructively. So the Alliance actually was born at the behest of the European Commission on the back of a very successful project, a CSA project from FP7, which was a roadmap for in silico clinical trials, which I'm very pleased to say that both Francois and Jean-Pierre were part of, and they contributed to that project. And it delivered a very nice document which has been published, and you can get it online. But the point was that the Commission at the end of it said, okay, you've delivered the document, you've delivered the roadmap. Where do we go from here? Where is the sustainability beyond the research funding? A question that often happens with research grants. They end, and then what happens? What do you do then? And we had the discussion. They said, why don't you set up a public-private partnership? Well, you can't do that in 6 months. That's a very big ask for anybody to do in a short time frame. But we suggested that perhaps what we could do is to gauge industry interest in coming together in a partnership of an informal type to explore the recommendations, of which there are about 36 in the roadmap, which included regulatory, to see how that goes. We had a very, very encouraging response, and that led to the creation of the Avicenna Alliance for Predictive Medicine, registered in Brussels as a not-for-profit, which is looking at the partnership between healthcare industries, not just pharma, but devices. And we have Johnson & Johnson on board that actually at corporate level has devices, pharma, and healthcare. So all three major arms of that business are represented in the Alliance. The core purpose is to address those regulatory barriers I've identified, to develop the policies on in silico medicine, and to link healthcare industries with expert researchers to develop and advance the field. The Commission were very, very honest in saying this stuff's moving so fast, we need to have help in understanding how to apply these things. This is working together to help formulate things. Our definition of predictive medicine, or in silico medicine, is the use of computer modeling and simulation in the diagnosis, treatment, or prevention of a disease. We believe that it contributes to advancing personalized medicine, as I've described before, through the use of big data. I'll come back to that in a minute. Turning raw data, of which there is a huge amount at the moment, into actionable information. Not just processing it and getting a readout, but turning it into something that you can take action with. And it can help to inform decision-making in healthcare. The Alliance, as I've said, is a partnership between healthcare industries broadly and academic research. Another success story for the European Commission, the Virtual Physiological Human Institute, which has a long history of funding from DG Connect and its predecessor, another not-for-profit, which is the academic researchers from around the world that are involved in driving forward the in silico applications to healthcare. This is a one-to-one board-level voting between academia and industry, so it's very truly a shared process, and we have 3 working groups on policy, international affairs, which I'll mention in a moment, and research, which is obviously looking at Horizon 2020 and its successor. How can we apply and suggest potential calls that are relevant to this extremely important area? We've only been going a year, but we've had some successes both in the Alliance and as the VPH Institute, of which I was Executive Director for a couple of years before I took over the Alliance. We were very successful in proposing text that was adopted in the Medical Devices Regulation. You can see it here, where in silico is now very clearly listed as something that is part of that regulation, which was approved on the 5th of April 2017. We were also incredibly lucky in the way that we were able also in the European Medicines Regulation, which was being reviewed as healthcare and veterinary care were separated in their review, to get two pieces of text which refer very clearly to modeling and simulation and its importance in reviewing the documents, and also this is very relevant going forward. It's quite interesting. Something that happened completely separately going on in the States in a parallel state was the US Senate Appropriations Committee recognized the value of in silico modeling. Again, this was something that emerged from one of the VPH members' involvement with their senator in the US, that helped to highlight the importance of in silico in the States. And this has appeared in Title VI of the United States Congress, the Appropriations Bill, where again, in silico is highlighted now at a political level as being something which is incredibly important. So you've got some examples there of how we're trying to operate to deliver what's really necessary, to give it to the politicians and the decision makers, the policy makers, to help them understand how this can begin to contribute. It's not going to solve everything, but it's going to be a key element of tackling the problems that we have in healthcare going forward. I think we'd be really, really bad situation if we don't actually embrace this going forward. Our ambition, our vision for the future is that the Alliance should actually become an interlocutor between industry, academia, regulators, the stakeholders that are relevant in actually moving healthcare forward. And that's our vision. So a quick snapshot here of progress, certainly in the last year, has been almost extraordinary. I mean, I stand here and think, what's happened? And it's not me. It's a great team of people that have worked very hard, in particular my colleagues in Brussels at Rhoda Public Policy, who are our secretariat, who've done a phenomenal job. This was our launch in the European Parliament in October, hosted by Sean Kelly and Nicola Caputo, where the FDA came and basically said, we want to work with you guys. We want to work together and help to harmonize, if not exact, harmonization's tough, but actually making sure we have alignment in our understanding going forward across the Atlantic. This led to the creation and signature literally 2 months ago in Washington of a memorandum of understanding with the FDA. This was reviewed and processed at lightning speed, 20 days for the FDA to review the draft and agree it at chief scientist level and signature. It was extraordinary that that happened. We were also invited by the chair of the the Senate Appropriations Committee, Senator Thad Cochran, to spend half a day with his team, with his senior advisors, to discuss their approaches in silico and ours. And one part of that was an agreement that we would have an open, informal exchange of information to ensure that we're moving in the same kind of direction, and that's going to be happening going forward. And finally, there's a new US commissioner that took his post, I think it was at the beginning of June, Scott Gottlieb, and in his speech at the Science Forum, you can see, for example, the CDRH, that's the Center for Devices and Radiological Health at the FDA, in collaboration with its members of academia and the device industry, are developing novel methods to create models of virtual patient outcomes. Leveraging prior clinical data, these models can be used to augment and thereby reduce the time and cost of future clinical trials. It can also improve efficiency. FDA, through CDRH, is now using this approach in a mock pre-market submission review. Things are beginning to move forward. The way we see this, unusually coming from an academic and an industry, policy is actually the foundation of enabling this approach. If you have a policy framework which basically says, let's embrace this approach, This is going to encourage research to respond to that. Through that research, you will get the validation that is necessary ultimately for the regulators to agree it and for it to be adopted formally going forward. And the approach that we're taking is obviously academia and industry, as I've mentioned. We now have the FDA as an observer member of the Alliance officially. We're hoping to be able to do something similar with the EMA. We have certainly a very firm, casual, informal relationship with them at the moment. Patients, through the European Forum on Good Clinical Practice, we now have reciprocal associate membership, which includes patients and clinicians and ethics. The ethics of this is really important. You can ask yourself the question, at what point will it become unethical to refuse to adopt an approach involving modeling and simulation for a patient when you know you can help them out? These are questions we're going to be addressing in 2 webinars towards the end of the year with EFGCP. And it's going to get worse. We have wearables. We have all kinds of information which is being collected and is being used in sort of para-healthcare, para-clinical ways, which basically we don't know what to do. Some companies have had their wrists slapped because they've actually given advice based on that, and we know that that's not possible. Policy in this area doesn't exist, largely. So the question is, how do we use that? Big data is a big challenge. I was part of the group that was invited to the Heads of Medicines Agencies, European Medicines Agency, Joint Task Force on Big Data and how regulators are going to address this. And modeling and simulation kept coming up as a theme going forward. So I think this is going to be really important. In a nutshell, industry and academia working together with key stakeholders, absolutely imperative in order to inform policy development alongside the technology as it emerges. Typically, technology flies forward fast and policy comes along with a cart and a horse behind, very much more slowly. So this way, it's important that we actually work together and help that policy develop at the same time. We need to focus strategically on its use across industry sectors, not just pharma, but broadly. Devices are going gangbusters here because they already know that they can do this kind of stuff. Offering expert inputs to consultations and providing evidence to build confidence on the technology application. Most importantly for me is we're working with the regulators. They're clearly really, really interested in doing this. We spent a day at the FDA. All I heard was encouragement to work with them and go forward, and this is beginning to be the case with the EMA as well. So in closing, I just want to say it's fantastic that I'm here. I'm really pleased. Thank you for the invitation. And I want to highlight the importance of NOVA in what we've done. Obviously, Jean-Pierre and Francois, as I said, were part of the Avicenna project, but more importantly, they recognized the value of the alliance as it was coming together and were instrumental as being part of the team that actually helped to set it up right at the beginning. And more importantly than that, it's not a big company. It's a small medium enterprise who recognizes this innovation is key. In this kind of alliance, we've got the big guns, but the voices of the small companies are absolutely critical for innovation, and they need to be part of this discussion going forward as well. And I think that NOVA is key to doing that. The work that they're doing on real-world evidence, the use of modeling and simulation, real-world evidence is absolutely critical, and the effect model, I think, can work extremely well for that. So thank you, Francois, Jean-Pierre, for inviting me, and I wish you every success, and I'm hoping that you continue to add to the successes that we collectively put together in the Alliance. So thank you very much indeed.